The wind in Siberia doesn't howl, it screams. It's a sound that cuts through bone, a raw reminder that nature doesn't care about human pride. My name is Daniel Ward, and I used to believe I could conquer anything, mountains, storms, even my own fear. I'd led expeditions across the Andes, trekked the frozen plateaus of Alaska, even crossed the edge of Antarctica once. But none of that prepared me for what happened in February 2024, deep in the Siberian wilderness. I wasn't supposed to be alone out there. Not completely. There were 4 of us, me, Eli, Jonas, Rafi, and a local guide named Mikhail. We were mapping a forgotten glacier valley, a place no one had charted in decades. The mission was funded by a private foundation. They wanted to study the melting ice layers for signs of ancient bacteria. For me, it was more than a job. It was a chance to feel alive again. I'd lost my wife, Emma, 2 years earlier to cancer. Since then, the silence of the wild had become my only comfort. Out there, I didn't have to talk. I just had to survive. But fate, cruel and precise, had other plans. The first days were brutal but manageable. Temperatures hovered around -35°C. The wind carved ridges into our tents, and frost formed inside our sleeping bags. Still, we laughed. Eli was the optimist, always humming old Beatles songs. Jonas was the skeptic, documenting every step on his GoPro. Rafi handled the equipment, quiet but reliable. And Mikhail was different. He barely spoke English, but there was something grounded about him, like the ice itself trusted him. On the second week, everything changed. We were crossing a narrow ridge above a crevasse when the snow beneath us shifted. There was no time to react. A thunderous crack tore through the air, and the ground disappeared. I remember falling, the world spinning in white silence, then impact. I hit a ledge halfway down, hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. Snow poured over me like an avalanche, burying me alive. When I came to, I could barely move. My radio was shattered. My GPS gone. My left arm throbbed in agony, likely broken. And then came the realization, I was alone. No voices. No rope. Just the hiss of wind echoing through ice walls. I screamed for the others until my throat bled. Nothing. By the time night fell, the cold was no longer painful, it was anesthetic. I drifted in and out of consciousness, thinking maybe this was how it ended. Buried in the belly of a nameless glacier, forgotten. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the wind. A bark. Short, sharp, close. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. But then, out of the pale blue mist, a shape appeared. Fur, movement, life. A Siberian Husky. He approached cautiously, eyes like frozen amber, tail low but steady. His fur was a mix of gray and white, thick as snowdrifts. He sniffed at me, then at my pack. I could see the intelligence behind his gaze, the quiet calculation of an animal that had seen men like me before. There was no collar, no tag, no sign he belonged to anyone. "Hey boy," I whispered, voice cracking. "You lost too." He tilted his head, then trotted a few meters away and looked back, as if telling me to follow. But I couldn't. My arm was useless, my ribs screamed, and the slope was treacherous. So he came back. He sat beside me, pressing his body against my chest, sharing warmth. I wept. Not from pain, from disbelief. The next morning, he was still there. When the sun rose, faint and white behind clouds, he stood, barked once, and started walking again, glancing back every few steps. It was clear, he wanted me to move. I tore strips from my tent fabric, made a sling, and forced myself up. Each step was torture. The Husky, I began calling him Ghost, never strayed far. For 2 days, we walked along the glacier's edge. He led, I followed. He found paths where I saw none, narrow snow bridges, shallow crevasses, hidden caves that offered shelter. At night, he'd curl against me, body trembling slightly, sharing heat. I gave him pieces of my ration bars, though I knew I needed them too. He refused at first, almost as if he knew I couldn't spare it. But when I insisted, he took them gently, always licking my fingers afterward. There was something almost human in that gesture. By the 4th day, I was hallucinating. The cold, hunger, dehydration, they played tricks on my mind. I started hearing voices. Emma's voice. She whispered that it was okay to let go, to rest. But Ghost kept me moving. When I stopped, he barked. When I stumbled, he pushed against me. He never let me lie down too long. That dog, that living compass, carried me through miles of white oblivion. Then came the storm. It hit without warning, a blizzard so fierce it erased the horizon. The wind was a wall of knives. I lost my footing and tumbled down a slope, sliding until I hit hard ice. My goggles shattered. My face burned from the frostbite. Ghost barked somewhere above, his shape barely visible through the white chaos. Then he vanished. I screamed his name, a sound the storm devoured instantly. That night, I crawled into a small crevice and waited for death. When I opened my eyes again, light was spilling into the cave. I was alive, and Ghost was there, covered in snow, muzzle frosted, but alive. Between his teeth, he carried something, a tattered strap. I didn't recognize it at first. Then I saw the red patch stitched to the side, Eli's backpack. My heart stopped. He dropped it beside me, then nudged it with his nose. Inside, there was a half-frozen radio transmitter. I wiped the frost from the dial, pressed the switch, static. Then a faint voice broke through. "Daniel? If you're hearing this, stay where you are. We're searching Grid 5. It was Jonas. I looked at Ghost. He wagged his tail once. Somehow, he'd found what I needed, and led me to it. Over the next 48 hours, I stayed alive because of him. The radio guided the rescue team to my coordinates, but the storm delayed them. I was weak, disoriented, starving. Ghost refused to leave my side. At one point, he disappeared for hours. I panicked, thinking he'd gone for good. But then he returned, dragging a frozen rabbit carcass. He dropped it next to me as if to say, "Eat." Live. When the rescue chopper finally arrived, I was barely conscious. The last thing I remember before passing out was Ghost standing on the ridge, watching, snow swirling around him like a guardian made of wind. I woke up 2 days later in a medical tent at the base station. Eli was gone, they never found him. Jonas and Rafi had frostbite, but survived. When I asked about Mikhail, they told me something that froze my blood colder than the snow ever could. "There was no Mikhail," the officer said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "He was our guide. From Yakutsk." The man shook his head. "We checked every local registry, every outfitter. No one by that name has worked here in years." I told them about Ghost, the husky who found me, who saved me. They smiled politely, like doctors humoring a fevered patient. "Mr. Ward," one medic said gently, "we didn't see any dog tracks near the site. Just yours." I thought they were wrong, until I looked at the photos Jonas took when the rescue arrived. In every frame, there I was alone. No paw prints. No shadow. No dog. For months, I tried to explain it away, shock, hallucination, trauma. But deep down, I knew what I felt was real. The warmth of Ghost's fur. The sound of his bark echoing in the storm. Too vivid to be imagined. Too alive to be fantasy. A year later, I returned to Siberia. Alone again. I found the same ridge, the same glacier. The ice had shifted, but the landscape still recognized me. As I reached the spot where I'd nearly died, something caught my eye, half buried in the snow. A collar. Leather, old, cracked. The tag read, 1972. Mikhail. My breath caught. Mikhail wasn't a man. He'd been a husky decades ago. A legend among local trappers, they later told me. A dog that had saved lost travelers in storms, over and over, until he vanished one winter and never returned. Some said his spirit still wandered the glacier, guiding those who lost their way. I don't know if ghosts are real, but I know that hope is. Sometimes it doesn't come as light or warmth. Sometimes it comes on 4 legs, with fur dusted in snow and eyes that remind you life isn't done with you yet. Ghost, or Mikhail, whatever he was, taught me something I'd forgotten since losing Emma. You don't survive because you're strong. You survive because something or someone believes you can. Now, whenever I guide new explorers, I tell them the same thing. If you ever lose hope out there, listen. If you hear a bark in the wind, don't be afraid. Just follow it. Because sometimes, salvation doesn't wear a human face. Sometimes it howls against the storm,